Joined now by UKIP's immigration spokesman Stephen Woolfe. He's been making a speech this morning arguing that Britain's ethnic minorities could play a decisive role in the upcoming EU referendum. Also here is the Labour MP David Lammy. Welcome to both of you. Why are you trying to bring race into the EU debate and referendum?
I'm not bringing race into it. I'm just saying that there's a group of people in this community that's actually been ignored for many, many years. And we actually also see that there is a concern by the ethnic community that likes immigration, wants immigration, and quite rightly, but is equally concerned about large-scale migration, and they should have their voice as part of this debate. Right.
You say they've been ignored. Who's been ignoring them?
Well, we don't hear about it too much, and this is the first time we've actually raised the issue about what is it that the black ethnic communities, such as my own, would want to hear.
But the research from British Future, where you gave your speech this morning, actually says most BME voters want to stay in.
Absolutely, and you see that from the research that they did in their booklet. But what they also said, and it's very clear in that research, is that one of the reasons that they have been concerned about Europe and the debate is that we've had this noise and anger in the debate, which I've been trying over the years to actually dissipate, talk about it more factually, talk about it. But actually, when you look into their concerns, 60% of them want to have something like an Australian points-based system. 60% of them are concerned about the inequality in the immigration process that we have now that treats European citizens more favourably than those outside of the European Union. And after all, I mean, as David will know in his community, there are those people who have come from African states who can't get jobs here because of our highly skilled visas network. There are those grannies who can't come over as easily through visas from Pakistan because of the system that this government has put in place to try and deal with EU migration.
David Lammy, UKIP are within their rights to appeal for the votes of BME people in Britain and to back their case to come out, aren't they?
They can do that. They did it at the general election, and 3%, just 3% of ethnic minorities voted for them. They did it in the Oldham by-election. Everyone said they were going to win, and they lost because all of the evidence is that Britain's ethnic minorities, as diverse as they are, and I have to say it was very patronising to talk about Indian grannies coming over and to put all black people as if they were all poor when there are doctors and lawyers and teachers. The overwhelming majority of Britain's ethnic minorities want to stay in Europe because they recognise the benefits and are very, very nervous about the risks.
Well, it's not the same sort of evidence that I get when I'm talking to people, David, and I'm not trying to be patronising. I'm trying to make the very clear point that there are those people in the community that I've spoken to who said, why is it that I have to have difficulties in getting my grandmother to come to a wedding, but if someone is a Spanish grandmother or a German grandmother, they can come over easily? I often put the argument is, why is it that my Irish grandmother could come over here quite easily, but my black American grandfather or my Jewish grandmother would face different rules in relation to the visa system?
Do you accept that?
And that is a direct discrimination, and I want to see an ethical migration system that treats everybody in the world equally, and that can only be done for an Australian points-based system out of Europe.
I can't stand the caricature about the people in this country from the Indian subcontinent, many of whom are doctors, accountants, lawyers. You're suggesting that they would vote on Europe purely on the basis of whether Granny can come over for a wedding. You know, 25% of businesses in London are run by ethnic minorities.
That's right.
Why is there this sort of caricature coming from UKIP? Why are you trying to divide one group of those who come into the country from another group? Why don't you recognise that many who are here, who have a darker skin, are second, third, fourth generation immigrants who, of course, recognise the benefits of Europe. The work we've done on anti-discrimination, agency workers, the minimum paid leave, paternity and maternity, all of that is why I suspect they will be voting to stay in Europe.
I mean, Stephen, what is it you're in favour of one sort of immigration because it helps you further your case to have Britain come out of Europe, rather than a different form of migration, which is from the EU?
No, I want to see a more ethical and equal migration system, and whether David believes that that is part of what is my raison d'etre, looking at the background where I was born, what it was the culture of the people that I grew up with, that's what I think is the fairest and most
But David
beneficial.
Lammy says you're doing the opposite. You're dividing the community by using two different types of immigration to back up your argument.
I don't think we're dividing. I'm listening to people's concerns, and they're saying this is what they say about the visa system that we have in place, and what we know is that visa system has been put in place by this government to restrict those from non-EU countries simply because it can't deal with the immigration issues about it. And when I talk about in this speech, I don't just talk about the immigration in relation to that, David. I talk about the freedom aspects, the communities that have come here from the Commonwealth fully understood about freedom. We had 2.5 million Indians fought for us in the Second World War, and then they had a fight to get their own independence after that. We have Nelson Mandela, who made it absolutely clear that he believed that Britain was the best democracy in the world, and the Parliament, the UK Parliament, was the best democratic institution.
Well, you said it. 1 million Indians died fighting for us.
That's right.
They fought for the European project, and they're not now going to vote on the basis of whether Granny can come over for a wedding.
Did you just say that they fought for the European project?
They fought for the European
Britain to get rid of a European dictator who was murdering and killing people. They didn't fight for the European Union. They didn't fight for the European Economic Community. That's
David
a complete
Lammy,
perversion of history and what they were fighting for.
Is there a point, though, that non-EU immigrants are discriminated against because of the system or the government's attempt, it's failed clearly, the government's attempt to bring down net migration, because that's the only area of immigration it can tackle? And in that sense, there is a sort of discrimination against people from the Commonwealth.
I don't like this business of one person's discriminating against somebody isn't. The facts are that, sadly, discrimination exists in our society. It affects many people from all sorts of backgrounds, and we all fight against it. And actually, Europe has been engaged in that fight, and many of Britain's ethnic minorities recognise that. I suspect in London in May, we will see lots of people from Europe able to vote in that election, voting actively for progressive parties, precisely because of that anti-racist and anti-discrimination fight.
Liz, I mean, in your constituency and in your experience anyway of campaigning, ethnic minority communities do have concerns too about immigration and what some people would say is uncontrolled immigration.
Yes, people have concerns about immigration, but let me just say this. I don't like the way that UKIP tries to set different groups against one another and create fear of the other. I mean, that's exactly what happened when the people, when immigration happened in the 50s and 60s, and that's exactly what UKIP are trying to do now. I represent a very diverse constituency, Leicester West, and I know that people are going to be voting on what's it going to do, what is this referendum going to mean for their jobs, for their businesses, what's it going to mean for people's rights at work, and a bigger issue actually, which is about what kind of country are we? Are we a country that is confident and proud and open and can engage with the rest of the world, or are we going to turn our back on that and somehow go back to a narrow nationalism or nostalgia? No, I think the British people are more confident about that and have a positive and optimistic outlook.
I mean, is that
what's going to win for Britain?
That's the reaction from the two other guests. Is that what you're proposing?
Of course, and I've expected that, and they've often used the line that we're trying to divide, but actually, if you look at the policies, I'm trying to make it a more equal and fair for the whole world, to recognise that we're in a modern world. You know, I'm English by birth, British by nationality, and I'm a global citizen. And as a consequence of that, we should be outwardly looking, globally trading.
Right.
And that's what Britain is as well. And what we have is an actually insularity about the European Union, looking at something that was a project at a time when we didn't have the internet, when we didn't have mobile phones.
Go there. Half our inward investment comes from there.
And what we're looking at is something that was an idea of the past, when we should be looking at ideas of the future.
But in terms of ethnic minority,
compete with China, Brazil, and other emerging huge economies if we're somehow out of the EU.
See, that's deeply patronising to business. It's deeply patronising to those who actually want to trade out. And what I'm really interested about is here you have a Labour Party that talks about taxation, but you're quite happily to sit alongside the things like Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley, who are funding the Leave campaign. Where is your ethical ideas about looking after the poorest in this country when you're in an argument that's supported by the big corporates?
Can I just before we move on, though, Liz Kendall, on the basis of what you said about the sort of country we are, is Jeremy Corbyn in the right place then, saying that we should be taking many more migrants from Calais and we should be doing more to help refugees in terms of taking more of them in?
I certainly think that we should be doing more to take particularly children. We've seen some terrible examples there, and we should
we be taking anybody who has a connection?
No, I think we should hold the Prime Minister to his commitment that he made earlier on in the year. But listen, there are some who believe that if we pull out of Europe, somehow we won't be affected by what's happening. And that is not the case. The only way we will solve this migration crisis is if we work with others. You cannot simply pull up the drawbridge and hope the rest of the world goes away.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And David Lammy. Sorry, you're going as well.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.